I guess we can start going for it.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us through some technical difficulties today. I am Hilary Flint, and I'm a Beaver County resident, a member of Unity Council, and also an employee of BC MAC. So heavily involved in the environmental movement. But today I'm here to talk to you about the East Palestine train derailment and how my community organized around that. So on our second slide, I'm just going to go into what happened in East Palestine. On February 3rd, a train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. On that train, there were 150 cars, and 38 of those cars derailed, and another 12 caught fire. That train was headed to Conway, Pennsylvania from Madison, Illinois. And what had happened was a wheel bearing was heating up. There was no alarm that triggered the crew to know that. And so they had been actually going through neighborhoods while the wheel was on fire, and eventually derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. At that point, about 2,000 residents were asked to evacuate. Um, and what people don't realize is that's not the end of the story. Just a couple days later, as authorities were working on putting that initial fire out, they believed that a tanker of vinyl chloride was close to imploding. And they took matters into their own hands, I guess, and decided then it's probably best to do what they call a controlled burn. So they actually lit those 5 tankers on fire.
Wow.
They blew them up, which is quite mind blowing. And so what they did is they dug a trench and then allowed those chemicals to burn off into the air. The Ohio National Guard and U.S. Department of Defense, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, all ordered an immediate evacuation on that day, and that just covered a 1 by 2 mile radius. So the concern was simply about shrapnel that might go into the community from these trains. The concern wasn't necessarily about the actual chemical vinyl chloride or what can be created from lighting vinyl chloride on fire. So just 2 days later, residents were told they can go home. And as you see here in the quote from Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, he believed that people were at risk in this red zone and then in this yellow zone. So I'm going to move to the next slide. And what's interesting about this is we all hear about this derailment as the East Palestine train derailment. But looking at this slide, that diagonal line is actually the Ohio PA border. So as you can see, it was more of Pennsylvania that was actually affected by this. And we just do not talk about that enough. At the time of the derailment and the open burn, we really didn't understand what was on that train. And it wasn't until later the EPA said there was hazardous materials, vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethyl hexylacrylate, ethylene glycol, and much more, unfortunately. And while these are chemicals of concern, the EPA claims that they do not detect any of those in the area. And they have not since February 12th, which would just be shortly after the incident. However, they did order Norfolk Southern to clean up contaminated soil and water. That order did not come until February 21st. And they just updated that order to talk about cleaning up the nearby creeks. And we are, over 8 months out now, and that just came out. Ultimately, over 32,000 fish, over 5,500 amphibians, crayfish, and other aquatic life died the week of the derailment and the burn. But as residents, we are still told it is completely safe. And to this day, we are told it is completely safe. So, on the next slide, I'm going to talk about how, as residents, we fought back against this because it was, while we were being told we were safe, our bodies weren't having that same belief. So we had rashes. You could smell the chemicals, and after a few short months, we realized, we really need to organize. So Unity Council was formed in April, about 2 months after the derailment. And the first thing that we did was get together and come up with a list of demands. I think in the beginning, we had all expected the EPA and the government would take care of us. But once we realized they weren't going to do that, that's when we got together. Most of us did not know each other before all of this, and Facebook was key in connecting us and making sure we could get organized. So we worked to get people from affected towns in Ohio and Pennsylvania assessed, what are our needs and what questions do we have? And that's where these demands were born. And still to this day, it's what we fight for. So demand number 1 was for a major disaster declaration. Number 2 was for relocation assistance. 3 was independent environmental testing, for independent medical testing. Um, then we asked for equality in how these decisions are made and who gets helped. And also, we had some demands about how and where they get rid of the waste from the derailment. Because the real concern was that, we were going to have a double exposure because they had planned to take it to Hermitage Thermal in East Liverpool, Ohio, which is just, a few miles away from East Palestine. And that wasn't acceptable. So, from those demands, that kind of has led all of our actions since then. And that major disaster declaration has been a really, really important thing that we are still fighting for to this day. So, in the next slide, I talk about how we harnessed political power. Um, to get this disaster declaration, there are a lot of steps that have went into it. Because this happened physically in the state of Ohio, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine had to first ask for a declaration. Pennsylvania governor could not do that until Mike DeWine did that in Ohio. And as time was going on, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine wasn't asking for any type of declaration, not a state of emergency, not a major disaster, nothing. So we very quickly learned we had to put pressure on him. We partnered with a worldwide NGO, only one, who hosted a petition for us. And that petition started out as a ask DeWine to file a state of emergency. It has since upgraded to ask Biden for a major disaster declaration. That petition has over 17,000 signatures, so it's been a really um, key piece of what we're doing. But the petition, wasn't enough. So we went to Columbus, Ohio to let Governor DeWine know that we were there and we needed help. So we actually disrupted session and we rallied in the rotunda outside so that they could hear us inside. We held a press conference. Um, we did everything we could to let people know we still needed help. And a couple days later, DeWine did ask for a declaration from the federal government. So then we had to pivot. And now, our fight isn't with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. Now it's with the President of the United States. So we did an email campaign with only one targeting the EPA. Then we targeted Biden. We've targeted FEMA. And all of that has kind of worked to get other residents that are impacted and people that signed our petition to help us lobby the federal government. We then went to Washington, D.C., and met with senators, representatives, the EPA. Um, really, a big cause of concern for us was in DeWine's letter to Biden. He said that there are currently no unmet needs. So what we did was we went right to Washington D.C. and let elected officials know there are unmet needs. We shared our stories with Democrats, Republicans, independents, and after that, we were very happy to receive some letters of support from senators and representatives all around the United States. And it's really important to me that that was bipartisan support because this isn't a red or blue issue. It's an issue of human lives. Currently, we are doing a email campaign against FEMA. So instead of declaring the major disaster declaration, what had happened was President Biden released an executive order, which assigned a FEMA representative, Jim McPherson, to figure out what was going on in the community and if we need that disaster declaration. To this day, not a single resident that I've spoken to has heard from Jim McPherson.
Wow.
So it's very hard to believe that he, knows what's going on in the community. And that's one of our biggest battles right now is just getting Jim McPherson to understand our needs, you're probably going to have to talk to us. And we only have about 2 weeks left to even get this major disaster declaration. So our political power is in full force right now.
Why is that, Hillary?
It is how the executive order was ordered by the president. So he gave a deadline on when FEMA had to submit a report, and then
Mm.
his decision will be made. I believe Health and Human Services, the Department of Transportation, there are a few other players that have to submit reports, but FEMA is really the one that's going to ultimately make the decision on what happens in our community. So without this disaster declaration, residents here won't have access to further federal programs such as Medicare for All, um,
Yeah.
which I will talk about in a few moments. But essentially, this is opening a door to get us the help that we need. And we're very close to that door being shut and locked permanently.
Also, before we go on to the next slide, is that you in the third photo?
Yes. So that is our Unity Council president, Jamie Wallace, former Vice President Al Gore, myself, and then Unity Council member Darren Gamble. So
Very
we
strong
went to
mustache.
yeah, we went to New York City for Climate Week, and one of our allies actually took us to this event and said, "Hey, Al Gore is going to be there, and you need to speak to him." So we did, and honestly, the executive order from President Biden happened just a couple days after this. So I
What
don't
a
want
coincidence.
to say that maybe I don't want to say that maybe that's why, but I think it's possible.
Awesome.
And from there, I talked about, it was our allies that got us New York City and made sure we were able to talk to Al Gore. And so, in the next slide, what was really important to us is gathering these allies and learning from others. What had happened in our community had never happened to any other community. There is no existing data on how all of these chemicals combined together will affect the human body or the environment. So we're kind of like guinea pigs, but there were pieces of what has happened to us that has happened elsewhere. So we reached out to these other communities to, learn about what happened with them. So in the first photo, that is the last mayor of Times Beach. Times Beach, Missouri is a town that was completely wiped out and relocated due to dioxin exposure in 1983. So we had been speaking to some of the residents, and it ended up that we were able to get Marilyn, the last mayor of Times Beach, up to the area. And we hosted an event where she talked about, what she went through and what her community went through, and just really laid out kind of what our future could look like. And I think that that opened a lot of eyes, especially since independent testing in East Palestine shows that the dioxin levels here are much higher than they were in Times Beach. So this whole community was uprooted and moved because of this, and yet we're still here. So Maryland and the residents of Times Beach, Missouri are allies. And another town that we found allies in is Libby, Montana. That entire town has Medicare for life due to a little known clause in the Affordable Care Act called Section 1881A. And we spoke to the residents and figured out, how did you guys get that? And it was a senator that lobbied for that. Their town had toxic asbestos dust from mines, and so the senator was just trying to figure out, how do we take care of people? And he did. And so then Unity Council was able to take that lesson to, our senators. And now we have, super far right Republican JD Vance advocating that our communities get Medicare for life. And he's admitted he, has to eat some crow that he's advocating for this, but he's doing it. And without us learning from the past, we wouldn't be able to do that. So we've spoken to residents from Superfund sites in Flint, Michigan, Love Canal, New York, Valley of the Drums, Kentucky, and we've even studied incidents around the world, like Cerveso, Italy, who they used fast action and an abundance of caution, which ultimately, protected their residents from a dioxin disaster. And, also we recognize that there are residents affected by petrochemical industry all over the United States. So we've connected with other folks in Appalachia and the Gulf South. And through that, we met, independent scientists and researchers that have been able to help us. Like the last photo there is independent scientist Scott Smith, and he is conducting a lot of the testing in East Palestine and the surrounding communities. And he's really been an important leader for us. And he's able to connect us to a lot of these different communities now because that's his job. He goes around to communities like us who have been impacted by such a disaster. So really, really important ally. And without them, I don't think Unity Council could do much of anything. And then the next slide is about, we utilize partnerships. So our greatest allies turned into partnerships. So we work very closely with Clean Air Council, Earthworks, Break Free from Plastic, Only One, Not an Alternative, Toxic Free Future, Beyond Plastics, Earth Justice, CHEJ. We're connected to people all over the world that are helping our small town. And not only do they provide us with expertise, they're actually increasing our capacity by helping write press releases, promoting events, setting up meetings with media and politicians and new partners. Unity Council is just a volunteer grassroots group. We are not a nonprofit. So what we do, we've done without funding. And that's because we have all of these wonderful partners who are able to fundraise and use their organizations to help. That way, affected residents, we don't have to worry about that piece. They're doing it for us. So without them, we definitely would not have been able to organize this quickly. To us, it doesn't feel like it was quick. But what I've learned from our allies is that we've done it a little bit faster than some places have been able to. And then the last part of how we've been able to organize was we used our stories. Um, Prior to this year, I had never been in a documentary. In the past 6 months, I've been in 13. I had never been on live TV. Now I appear on News Nation almost every week. I had never been paid to speak about my story or my experience, last month I made more as a speaker than I did in my full-time job. So we very quickly realized our stories are our power, and each of us have a very, very unique role to play. So we mapped out what each resident can talk about, what their capacity level is, and of course, what are they willing to talk about. And when a media opportunity arises, we go to who is best for the opportunity. No one in Unity Council worries about egos or who gets credit. We are really focused on what's best for the collective, even if that means going outside of Unity Council and tapping someone from the community to speak. For example, we have Dr. Chai, who is now lovingly known as the Creek Ranger, who, if someone has a question about the creeks in East Palestine, that's who I call. I'm not going to talk about it because we have this person who's going out there and actually, videotaping and taking samples and getting those tested. So he's the best person for the job. Um, and we very rarely say no. So we speak to journalists all across the political spectrum. I am never shy to admit I'm a registered Democrat, but if Fox News is calling, I'll be on Fox News because right now it's not a red or blue issue. It's about human lives, and we will talk to whoever we have to try to get the help that we need. Our stories have been in the New York Times, featured on a special hosted by Chris Cuomo. We're going to be in Times Magazine on the 1 year anniversary. And, we've accomplished so much in the past 8 months, but it still hasn't got us the help that we need. It still hasn't relocated residents. It's not made Norfolk Southern treat people fairly. It's not gotten us indoor air testing. But we haven't lost hope. So on my last slide today, I talk a little bit about, what can you do to help? Um, I mentioned that we have this petition with only one asking for a disaster declaration from the White House. So please, I encourage everyone to sign that. It's super, super important. We only have a couple weeks, and if we don't get this, then that door is closed forever. So it's really the most important thing you could do to help affected residents right now. And then the other petition that's out there is Beyond Plastics has a petition to ban vinyl chloride. Mom's Clean Air Force does as well. And this seems like something that might actually happen. A few different groups met with the EPA in Washington, D.C. Alongside, Unity Council was there talking to different senators, and they were talking about, they were meeting with the EPA talking about vinyl chloride specifically. And the EPA is actually considering making that a banned chemical. Our story is a very visible way of explaining what vinyl chloride can do. We've experienced 5 tankers of vinyl chloride blowing up in our backyard. And while it's disgusting that that happened, it's also helping take this ban on vinyl chloride over the finish line. So any further support we can get for that is absolutely, going to help, not necessarily the people here now, but your community in the future. And then we are also hosting a rally on Wednesday, November 8th in Pittsburgh. So, we'll drop links for all of this as well so that people can RSVP. But Norfolk Southern has continued to sponsor international industry conferences while our people suffer here. So we are going to meet them at the Met Coke World Summit, where they are, one of the main sponsors, and just rally and host a press conference to bring awareness right alongside other residents impacted by the coking industry. So it's going to be a really powerful moment to bring together all of these people who we don't necessarily have the same enemy, but we are all fighting the same war. So please show up for us. We'd really appreciate it. And there is so much going on. It would take me days to go over every little thing that's happened and how we've had to respond. So if anyone's interested in keeping up with that, you're very welcome to join our Facebook group where we post any of the media, or anything that's, an update on East Palestine and the surrounding area. Um, thank you guys so much for having me today, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Yeah. I know personally your comment about vinyl chloride and being able to see it and that gets people more motivated. It's distressing at times that people need to see to believe it. I mean, we've talked about it, some of our partners, the wildfire smoke and how that, everybody all of a sudden became a lot more concerned about air quality, even though it's something that a lot of our groups have been fighting for years. And it does kind of have that, like, I guess, silver lining of motivating people who weren't exactly a part of the fight beforehand or didn't know that there was really a fight beforehand. Because once you see it, you can't really deny it.
Yeah, and so the wildfire smoke was affecting our community, just a couple months after this had happened.
Yeah,
And we saw how everyone everywhere was talking about, like, oh, it's impacting my air quality and I'm having a hard time breathing. I can't go outside. And our community was like, yeah, welcome to what we're dealing with too. And
yeah,
you care now. So, by the way, like, sign this petition, like, come to our rally. You
yeah,
have now seen how this affects people. So, it was another opportunity for us to tie in what we're going through. And it's sad that we live in a world where we have to be personally impacted to have an understanding.
yeah,
I wish that the world just had more empathy in general, but anytime that we can use our story and tie it to current events and what's going on, we will find that link, because we have to,
yeah,
we're talking about there are still kids sick. There are people in my community. Just yesterday, another person was diagnosed with cancer. This is an ongoing crisis. People think it's a train derailed and things are done. It's not done for the people here, and we need help.
yeah. Yeah, and we'll post all those links on our social media account too, obviously, and I'll post them on my personal one because the work you and Unity Council are doing is genuinely really inspiring. I don't know if Corey, you had any questions or anyone watching had any questions.
I'll take a moment to just, shout out to the work you guys are doing at Protect PT. I got to meet all of you in Harrisburg for Climate Convergence, and it was just such an honor and to learn from, your organization and how you've been able to grow and have real impact. It's just an honor anytime I get to talk to you guys or work with you. So thank you for having
Yeah,
me today.
of course. Love talking to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions because you did a great job presenting. Very thorough, honestly. I was even like, I didn't really have many. But thank you everyone for joining us here today. And thank you, Hilary, for speaking with us and hanging on through. It was really a motivating conversation. And yeah, definitely people go out and rally with them. November 8th. Of
Thank you. Everyone have a wonderful day, and thanks for having me.
course. Bye, everyone. Happy Halloween.